Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
And I'm Lauren. This month, we read A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon.
Samantha Shannon is a New York Times and Sunday Times best-selling author. She was born in West London in 1991 and started writing in abundance when she was 12. She studied English literature and literature at St. Anne's College in Oxford from 2010 to 2013, specializing in the poetry of Emily Dickinson and the principles of film criticism. In 2013, at the age of 21, she published The Bone Season, the internationally best-selling first installment in a 7-book series of fantasy novels. Its first sequel, The Mime Order, was published in 2015, and the next, The Song Rising, in 2017. Her first book outside the series was The Priory of the Orange Tree, which was the finalist for Lambda Literary Awards in 2020, and also a book that we reviewed many moons ago. She's currently working on the 5th book and the 6th book in the Bone Season series, and obviously the book that we are reviewing today, A Day of Fallen Night, a prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree, just recently came out about a month ago. Barbara, you want to tell us a little bit specifically about the book?
Sure. This was originally published, like Michael said, February 28th of 2023. The genre is considered high fantasy. It is 880 pages. Yes, it is quite long of a book there. Luckily, it is bigger print, so just keep that in mind. And it currently has a 4.6 on Goodreads, 4.8 on Barnes & Nobles, 4.6 on Amazon, and a 4.8 on Audible. And as of this recording, this book did just come out, so I believe it's a little too new to have any nominations for anything as of yet. So as of right now, it hasn't been nominated or won any awards yet. And we do think it's important for readers to know what, if any, representation is in the books we read. So for this book, it's all the things. It has all the things, and it makes me so happy that there are main and minor POC characters, there's main and minor LGBTQ plus characters, and main characters with disabilities. And I just want to, again, mention how inclusive this book is and how natural it felt in the world. And while reading it, I just loved it, and it makes me really, really happy to read very inclusive books like this, to be honest. So
I'd agree with that. And also just when, like, the fact that it didn't seem forced. Like, some
not at all.
books, I feel like they just, like, throw that in just to, like, be inclusive. And
right.
This one was
like,
very...
checklist. I added a POC character. There we go. Or, So, yes, this was so easily done. Mm-hmm. Yep. She did an amazing job. So I will definitely toot her horn on this one. So if you're looking for a very inclusive book, this one's def one for you.
All right. Before we jump into talking about the book, Lauren, do you want to give us a little brief summary?
Yes. So in A Day of Fallen Night, Samantha Shannon sweeps readers back to the universe of Priory of the Orange Tree and into the lives of 4 women, showing us a course of events that shaped their world for generations to come. Tunuva Melim is a sister of the Priory. For 50 years, she is trained to slay wyrms, but none have appeared since the Nameless One, and the younger generation is starting to question the Priory's purpose. To the north, in the Queendom of Inys, Sabran the Ambitious has married the new King of Hróth, narrowly saving both realms from ruin. Their daughter Glorian trails in their shadow exactly where she wants to be. The dragons of the east have slept for centuries. Dumai has spent her life in a Sakanese mountain temple, trying to wake the gods from their long slumber. Now, someone from her mother's past is coming to upend her fate. When the Dreadmount erupts, bringing with it an age of terror and violence, these women must find the strength to protect humankind from a devastating threat.
What did you think about A Day of Fallen Night? And remember, no spoilers.
So I really like this book. It did take me a bit to get into it because, like any really long fantasy book, it just takes a while for the story to really get going. But when this one finally did hit its stride, I was all in for it. This is a very character-driven story, and I would have liked to see a little more of a balance between character-driven versus plot-driven. But that's fine because I do like character-driven stories when it's done well, and I believe she did a good job for this one. The characters are all really amazing. I think it's a great main cast that had different voices and felt very three-dimensional and really fleshed out. Even side characters are all great as well for the most part. Like the main side characters were all very fleshed out as well. I think even like the human baddies were all really good. The worm baddies are kind of not really a lot because, they're worms. So, can't get too much personality for for creatures, you know,
I
kind of
mean,
hard.
they are sentient. That would be an interesting perspective.
That would be a very interesting perspective. I think that would be cool to see maybe in a future book, maybe. I mean, they were good from what we got a little bit, but like I said, we don't really get too much of them. The world building was amazing and felt very lived in.
I'm going to echo that. I loved this book. For those of you that have been listening for a while and have listened to our review of Priory of the Orange Tree, you'll probably remember that I had some criticisms for that book about its pacing, and it was definitely had problems with that, at least in my opinion. I think, though, A Day of Fallen Night, Samantha Shannon has corrected all of that. The pacing, I thought, was much better. It didn't feel like, I mean, it's obviously a long book, as I'm sure Lauren will talk about in a minute. But it didn't feel as long as it did. And once it really took hold, like it was one that you didn't want to put down. The characters were all amazing. I thought that the main characters were really well developed, and I loved that the story was character driven. The side characters felt like they really mattered. You actually got to learn a little bit about them. They weren't just side characters that were there to progress the plot. And like Barbara said, that the world building that she does, that is always amazing. And this world feels very lived in. It feels like even though maybe you're experiencing this one tiny part of the world right now, like the rest of the world is still moving around it. And it was, I don't know, she does a really good job writing that. And it takes a really talented author to build a world and make it feel alive in the way that she did in this book. I really enjoyed it.
Overall, I really enjoyed it. That being said, this is a long book, like 28-hour listen on Audible, which, to put that in perspective, the most of the books that like I read by choice in my free time are like 9 to 11-hour books. So this was like literally like triple the amount just for one book. So, and it really didn't pick up for me until about halfway through. So that's hard. That's like a lot of hours of listening. Not that like the first half sucked by any means. It was just kind of like a slow burn. There are a lot of characters and subplots to keep track of. Like regionally, like the author did such a good job of creating a world that was super complex, but it was also like, especially in the audiobook format, really hard to keep track of. It's written in different perspectives. And so it's hard to keep track. Like, I like that where it's like, okay, this chapter is this person's voice or whatever normally. But there were so many characters that they were doing that for. And when you're just listening, it was hard to figure out who was talking and what was going on when. But despite its length and despite the audiobook version of being hard to track, I enjoyed the badass female characters. I always like a good badass female character. I enjoyed all of the representation like we already talked about, and I really liked the world building, so it was good.
So we won't go into our individual ratings for now. Got to wait for that till the end. But our group score for this one was a 9 out of 10. Next question, would you recommend this book? And yes, I think the easy answer is yes. As long as you like fantasy books, if you're someone who absolutely like this is, because there are other people out there that don't like fantasy and sci-fi books, they just don't read them. And if you don't like them, then you shouldn't read this. But for the most part, yes, I would absolutely recommend this. The representation is amazing. The fact that it technically, like, yes, it's part of a series, but you don't have to read both books. Like, you can just read either of the books standalone and have a complete and total story. There just happens to be some connections if you do read both. So that makes it easier to recommend, because I know some people are apprehensive about getting into a series, especially a series of books that are 800 pages long. So yeah, I mean, I think absolutely I would recommend this to pretty much everybody. Anybody who is even slightly interested in fantasy should read this book, because while it is the high fantasy genre, I think that it is something you could recommend more broadly, just because there's quite a bit of other genres I would include as well. Like, it's got a lot of political intrigue. It's got a lot of social and cultural mechanics that are happening there too, that are not just the fantastical of the dragons that I'm sure Barbara will talk about in just a second. But yes, I absolutely would recommend it.
Yeah, I would recommend it as well, especially for those who have either already read Priory or want to read Priory. I actually did recommend it to a friend in a book club that I'm in, and she was asking, like, should I read Priory first or this first? And I was like, well, if I could go back and like read this one first, I might, just because then I like to read things in chronological order. But yeah, I would recommend it. I think that it's got a lot of good elements. Definitely going to warn people that I recommend it to, just about the length and the slow burn factor, but ultimately it's really good.
Oh yeah, I definitely would recommend this book. I already have, in fact, recommended this book to a few people. I personally think this one was better than Priory. So fans of Priory, if they enjoyed that one, I think will love this one even more personally. The problem with them being standalones are if you read, I don't think there's any particular order you have to read them in, but if you read one versus the other, you're going to get spoiled either way. If you read Priory first, then you know the stakes aren't as high because this one's a prequel. So clearly, you know that going in. If you read this one first, then you kind of know what's going to happen in the Priory as far as setting things up and a few spoiler stuff that happens in the Priory that were kind of shock factors when you're like, oh my gosh. So it really just depends on what you care about as far as reading what order, but they're both standalone, so it doesn't really matter. Also, dragons. This one was promised dragons, and I got my dragons.
There it is. There's the dragons.
So many more dragons. Yes. So many. I'm not going to spoil anything, but just know that if you, like me, enjoy dragons in your story, this one promises dragons and has more dragons in it, and that's all I will say about that, so not to spoil anything. Also, on another side note, I really like how she wrote such diverse characters. This is how you write diverse characters, including strong female characters. And the thing is, it's not like in your face, so if you're not aware of certain characters or certain things, because this is a fantasy world, so technically there aren't Latin characters technically, but like the way that she describes them, they are POC characters. So just an FYI with that as well.
For those of you leaving us, don't forget to give us a rating if you like this episode, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. In both places, our handle is @BadassLitPod. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got a book you want us to read on a future episode, let us know. Now, for a short preview of our next episode, next month we are reading Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, and Lauren is going to give us a little synopsis right now.
Viewing an apartment normally doesn't turn into a life or death situation, but this particular open house becomes just that when a failed bank robber bursts in and takes everyone in the apartment hostage. As the pressure mounts, the 8 strangers begin slowly opening up to one another and reveal long-hidden truths. First is Zara, a wealthy bank director who has been too busy to care about anyone else until tragedy changed her life. Now she's obsessed with visiting open houses to see how ordinary people live and perhaps to set an old wrong to right. Then there's Roger and Annalena, an IKEA-addicted retired couple who are on a never-ending hunt for fixer-uppers to hide the fact that they don't know how to fix their own failing marriage. Julia and Ro are a young lesbian couple and soon-to-be parents who are nervous about their chances for a successful life together since they can't agree on anything. And there's Estelle, an 80-year-old woman who has lived long enough to be unimpressed by a masked bank robber waving a gun in her face. Despite the story she tells them all, Estelle hasn't really come to the apartment to view it for her daughter, and her husband really isn't outside parking the car. As police surround the premises and television channels broadcast the hostage situation live, the tension mounts and even deeper secrets are slowly revealed. Before long, the robber must decide which is the more terrifying prospect, going out to face the police or staying in the apartment with this group of impossible people. Rich with Frederick Bachman's pitch-perfect dialogue and an unparalleled understanding of human nature, Anxious People's whimsical plot serves up unforgettable insights into the human condition and a gentle reminder to be compassionate to all the anxious people we encounter every day.
Not gonna lie, I'm excited for this one. It sounds interesting.
It
sounds like a movie I would like to watch, so I'm excited to read the book. But remember, the next part of this episode is an in-depth look at A Day of Fallen Night. So if you do want to read that book and you haven't yet, stop listening right now and come back and listen to the rest once you're done.
Hey guys, my name's Abby and I co-host the Book Life podcast with my best friend Mo. We cover fantasy, sci-fi, and historical fiction books and talk book-related topics like our favorite character types, world building, and books versus their movies. New episodes drop every Monday on your favorite platform. Now, back to your show.
Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. So we're going to start like we always start and figure out who gets the Badass Character Award. Barbara, who was your nomination for A Day of Fallen Night?
Yeah, it's really hard to pick. This book had so many. Like, we've had a few books where it's like hard to pick because there weren't any really technically. This one's the
True.
opposite. So like they're all badasses in their own right. But I think if I had to pick, I have to go with Demai just for her quiet strength and then her selflessness act that she did.
Maybe R.I.P.
I'm still not over it. R.I.P. Or maybe.
Perhaps.
In my canon, in my head canon, she's alive.
She said she
We
is.
may or may not find out if she decides to write a sequel to this one.
True.
She's writing another book. She hasn't said when it's going to be set.
Yeah. Plus, I don't think she would do the same characters.
Anyway, so I agree with Barbara 100% that picking on this one is very hard. Like all of our main cast and some of our supporting cast are badass characters. So I was really up in the air between Dumai and Glorian. And I'll just straight up say this, after reading Lauren's response to this question, I was like, I have to pick Glorian. And I'm not going to say the response.
This one was super
Lauren can
hard
say it for herself, but Glorian is my nomination.
But my pick was Glorian because of her literal giving birth and then directly going into like effing battle. Like she literally just had a baby, popped the baby out. She's still bleeding. Like she's like, no, I'll be fine. I'm going to mount this horse and like, let's fucking go. And it's just like, wow. And then in second place was Tunuva, just for general badassery and perseverance because like, I felt like she went through a lot. And I mean, they all went through a lot, right? And I like Dumai too. It was hard, but Glorian. He was. But when you have these kinds of characters that are female characters, you gotta pick.
Yeah, he was. Like all of them are.
But before we get to those questions, let's do a quick run through of the characters. And we'll start with the perspective characters. And the first one is Tunuva. Tunuva is a sister of the Priory of the Orange Tree. She is, like I said, one of our perspective characters.
She's at the start of the book, 50 years old. The book goes in through 4 years.
So she's in her 50s for the entirety of the book, which actually, when you put that into perspective, some of the stuff she does is pretty dang badass too for a woman in her 50s. But yeah, so she's a sister of the Priory. There's another character we'll talk about later named Esbar, who's the prioress at the end of the book. But Tunuva and her are lovers, but not anything beyond that because that's not allowed in the Priory. And then I guess another connection you could talk about that we'll get to later too is with Siu, which is Esbar's biological daughter, but I feel like Tunuva is more of a mom to her in some ways than
she's her namesake.
No, a main dramatic thing in this book is that she lost her son when he was 9 months old. I think her son was in the woods with his dad.
Not a husband.
They don't do that. His dad.
No, they don't get married in the Priory.
This was his dad, and he was in the woods teaching him about bees and collecting honey, and the baby daddy got killed, and Tunuva all this time had assumed that her son had gotten killed as well. And so that was a big driving factor later in the book when she finds out he might be alive. But we'll talk more about that later.
So she
our
is
next character
the daughter
is
of
Glorian.
Sabran
Lauren, you want to tell us a little about her?
Princess and a to-be queen. She's also the Badass Character Award. Basically, I feel like, and we talk about this later, or at least I know Barbara and I put different things about it later on, just the fact that she's very like self-sacrificing, believing kind of that her purpose is completely surrounded about producing an heir essentially and being like a vessel to basically bring life into the world. And so and she's young, like 16 or something, 15.
And she's young too. She's 15 at the start of the book. So if you think about it,
not only that, but
like
knowing that like that's not even her preference,
or
and so
child.
it's just like So I thought that her character was very like, it was hard to read for me just because I felt so much empathy and like sympathy for her throughout. But she was also just like a general badass and leader and just all of the things.
So moving on from there, Wolf is our next character that we're talking about as far as perspectives. Wolf is the only male perspective character. He is a soldier for Glorian's dad. He's a soldier in the king's army. He actually, I think, is one of his top soldiers, right? Because he's part of like the effective, like, I don't know what you'd call this, like their secret service for the king. Like he's like he goes with the king
protector.
Everywhere.
Like, he has a little
bodyguard
like, entourage of warriors, and he's one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, he
yeah,
is, but
essentially a bodyguard.
I thought of it like Secret Service, since there's like a retinue of them that are following the king around, and he's one of them, like one of the king's trusted people. So he's a really, really badass character as well, as far as his fighting and things like that. A little bit about his upbringing. He was from a town up north. He was found. One of his dads found him on the edge of the woods and brought him home, and they just welcomed him into their family as their adopted son. And then, obviously, and since we're in the spoiler section, you find out much, much later that he was actually stolen from the Priory by Conthi, and left outside the woods. And that's so Wolf is Tunuva's son. The Tunuva's missing son is Wolf, and that's a huge moment later on in the book when you try to finally make those connections. But yeah, that's Wolf. Another thing I guess to add as well is he's really good friends with Glorian. He was as a child, he was at court a lot, and they played a lot as children. They were childhood friends, still really good friends as they're older. And he also, when Glorian gets betrothed to a 70-year-old man, Wolf helps her out of friendship to get with child with him, as opposed to with the 70-some-year-old.
I really like their relationship, their friendship.
Yeah.
He is such a sweetheart, and he's such a great friend to like everybody. Like he's such a well-written man.
Very loyal character too, to his friends, family, everybody else. But that's just a little bit about Wolf. We'll talk about him some more later too. And then Barbara, I know you're excited to talk about Dumai. So
okay, so Dumai starts out in the mountain with her mom, and come to find out that she is actually the illegitimate child of the Emperor of Seki. And he comes in and tells her, like, hey, this other family is trying to overtake our standings in Seki and overthrow us, so now you have to be my heir to the throne because I need you. And that's her story. It sucks. And then she becomes a dragon rider because the dragon Fertia chooses her, and then she can actually like talk to the dragons, and all the dragons in her head, like they talk to her in her mind. And she's the OG dragon rider. So that's a little bit of Dumai, and her story is just about trying to save Seki, and then dealing with court problems because of the stupid River Lord. And she and Nakia heart each other, and I heart them as well.
In the audiobook, it was Nikia.
Or Nikia? Is that how you say Nikia?
Nikia.
And the dragon was
Nikia. I call it Nikia, but okay, Nikia.
Yeah, in the audiobook, but you never know.
Fertia. I called her Fertia.
And Barbara, since Nikia was your favorite character, you could just take her next. Go ahead.
Oh. So Nikia is the daughter of the evil River Lord. And so, yes, children, yes, this is enemies to lover. Our favorite trope. And by ours, I mean mine. It's mine. I'm ours. It's me. So, and I love her because she is sarcastic and she's witty, and so essentially her father pretty much raised her to be like, they call her the Lady of Many Faces because, she's great with court intrigue and all that jazz. And then she just starts to fall in love with Dumai and kind of switches gears and tells her dad to F off. So that's Nikia. I don't know if I missed anything else, but that's whatever.
I think that's enough. I mean, there's so many characters in this book, and there's so much depth to each of them. Right. Like this is just meant to be like a little glossing over of all.
Oh, I do want to say that Seki is based off of.
So can we just
Chinese culture?
Say
so that is kind of
the author. So there's all these characters. I think this is the most characters we've ever had in this segment, as far as being relevant characters. And every single one of these characters has an arc, and every single one has a storyline and is well written and well plotted, and you love all of them, or not everybody loves all of them, but so there's definitely
right. You love to hate them or love them.
And just to give you perspective to what you're saying, Lauren, there's 13 characters in our list, and there could have been more.
Is it
Shannon? Easily. That's the last name? Easily.
Samantha Shannon was able to write so many freaking badass characters and give them arcs and make them all like meaningful, because a lot of times when you get too many characters going, you like lose some of that. Yeah.
It's just for plot points, right? They're like there just to move along the plot or something, or for the character to grow, and then that's it. But all of these are very,
they all
like
have their
said,
own
very
like
significant.
complexities
they all
and
have
backstories
in the story or in the character's arc.
Yep. No, that's 100% true. Let's see. Next character on our list is the River Lord. So, as Barbara said, that's Nikae's dad. He's also known as Lord Kuposa of the Kuposa clan.
I mean, yeah, that's their last name.
Right. The Kuposa clan has always been the advisors and close. Think of them as like the Jafar to the emperor. That's kind of how I thought about them. Because he's essentially like an advisor to the emperor in his ear. But in this case, the emperor knows that he's evil as hell, and he's trying to
overthrow him.
He's trying to, right, he wants power.
Yeah.
I would call him a minor antagonist in the book. He's a major antagonist in Dumai's story, but he's a minor antagonist for the overall plot.
I feel like each character has their own main antagonist, and then the overall hedgeling of the big baddie would be the evil fire-breathing dragons, worms, wyverns. I'm not quite sure what.
Both.
All of the above. So,
but that's Lord Kuposa. I mean, the Kuposa clan and all of that added a really interesting, almost like a political thriller element to the book when it came to Dumai's story, because you have all this political intrigue and people vying for other people's positions,
which is funny because I absolutely always hated the political aspect, but in this one, I loved it.
It was funny. You were ahead of me in this book. And when you first got to all this, you're like, Michael, you're going to really like the Dumai chapters. And I was like, why? Like, they've just been fine so far. And she's like, no, you're going to really like them because of the political stuff. I was like, yeah, okay. I saw that later on for sure. All right, let's talk about some dragons. Who wants to talk about Fertia?
So Fertia is the water dragon from Seiki. So the Seikis believe they actually, water dragons are their gods. And I think they just call them gods. And they've been sleeping at this point in the story, and Fertia is one of the only. I'm sorry. I'm gonna completely pronounce this incorrectly, and I'm just gonna say how I was saying it in my head. I apologize, but it is what it is. I'm sorry. So yes, she is the one that Dumai's father brings her to talk, and that's how she kind of gets a connection with her, and then becomes pretty much a dragon rider with Fertia. Like, they're partners. Their story is very intertwined because Fertia is like, hey, like, things are happening, we need to do this, and it's the driving force for Dumai's story, where Dumai does kind of like, okay, we have to go here and here and here, and she dies at the end, and it breaks my heart, and she self-sacrifices with 6 other dragons to overthrow the mean baddie other dragon, and it was so sad because I really liked her, and she's the OG dragon in the book. Like, you meet her, I would say about 26-ish% into the book, and then she's pretty much in all of Dumai's chapters, and I love their relationship and their friendship, and I'm hard to do.
True, sad.
But yes, the difference between the dragons are the water dragons obviously get their powers from water, and then what's the type of magic? They call it, it's
falling
not
stars.
Well, sure, the falling stars, but there's actual, like, they named it something, but it's like white magic versus the fire magic.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember.
It's like earth magic versus air magic.
Yeah.
Earth and fire versus air and water.
Yeah, but they don't have wings. They have a little like gullet thing that lets them fly, and that's them. If you read the Priory, then you would know this because Tani had. Yeah. But so yeah. They're the water. They're the good dragons. They're on the human side.
Why do I have
Lauren,
to
you can talk about
Viridel?
The bad dragon, which is next. Viridel.
So Viridel is literal evil. He's a worm or wyrm, depending on whose chapter you're reading from in the Audible book. Different narrators. Yeah, different narrators.
It's true.
Yeah, because originally I thought, okay,
really?
like we've got worms and wyrms, wyrms, whatever. And so then I'm Googling like the difference, and it's like clearly it's just people pronouncing it differently. But also don't Google that. Like, you're going to have nightmares. Worms are basically dragons, but without like legs and arms. And they're like, I don't even know. Anyway, Viridel is the asshole of all assholes, and he's the big baddie of dragons.
I mean, if you've read the Priory, then you recognize him because he is the Nameless One's top general. Like they call him like the high. What do you? I don't know. Lieutenant. Is lieutenant higher than general?
No, general's higher than lieutenant.
Okay, so he's the general. He's his number one right hand arm, whatever the saying is.
He's arguably the primary antagonist.
He's the big baddie.
Priory of the Orange Tree. Of both books, actually.
Of both books, yes. Yeah. So, yes. So
we shouldn't. Let's not spoil Priory because we're not talking about Priory.
I'm sorry. Okay, so here's the thing. We're going to be spoiling
it's literally
stuff
a
about
prequel,
Priory.
Michael.
So if you haven't read that, then don't listen to this either because... Right, the book will be spoiled because there are connections in this one.
I'm just saying because you said at the beginning that you could read either of them and in any order. So if someone is deciding to come to this series now and read the prequel and then the next one, then they may not.
There's going to be some spoilers.
I'm just saying you should listen to both. There's going to be some spoilers. Well, there's going to be a bigger spoiler that I'm going to talk about later on. I'm just saying. Anyway, he is the overall big baddie, and you should recognize him if you read The Priory because he is also there, and he's an asshole.
All right. Next is we're going back to The Priory. To Esbar, which I touched on earlier when I was talking about Tunuva. Esbar is around the same age as Tunuva, I think, right? Or a little bit older?
No, they're around the same age. I think, if anything, she's like a year older or something.
So they are best friends and lovers and very close. And they effectively are both like the moms of Siyu, who is actually Esbar's biological daughter.
Some would say they were roommates.
As we talked about, the Priory doesn't have like the traditional family structure that we're used to in other societies. Like they have children, but it's part of the process of growing the Priory. Their only commitment is to the mother or the prioress.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Speaking of the prioress, Esbar does become prioress later on in the book, about 60% through. So she eventually takes on that role after the original prioress passes away. Sigan, right? Is that her name? But anyway, that's Esbar. Esbar, another contender for the Badass Character Award, to be perfectly honest. Like, there were a number of battle scenes that she was like,
Yeah, but Tunuva's a better fighter. Like, she beats every time they fight or they spar together, she always beats her. I didn't mean to do that.
Esbar's a good leader. But anyway, that's a little bit about Esbar. Let's see. Next up, sticking with the Priory, is Siyu. A sister of the Priory. She is, like I said a second ago, Esbar's biological daughter, and Tunuva is very much a mother figure for her and becomes like a surrogate for the child that she lost as well. Siyu is very young. We find out that Siyu's been sneaking off into the woods and has met a boy, and that's
not part of the Priory.
Not part of the Priory, which is a very big no-no because no one can know where the Priory is or that they exist and all those things. She ends up getting pregnant from said boy and then runs, which leads
multiple
to multiple times. And leads to this entirely long story about them going off after her and finding her, and all sorts of crazy things happen. But that's Siyu. She's one of the daughters of the Priory. She's also a really good fighter. She was trained by Tunuva. I mean, that's the gist of what Siyu is. We can go into more detail, but then you're just talking about the plot of a story at that point.
So I liked her relationship with Wolf too. At first, it seemed like she was going to be jealous of him because Tunuva found like her actual biological son, and then I liked their relationship. They really felt like to me like a brother and sister relationship.
They did. They definitely did, and it was fun at the end to see that when she eventually comes to visit Wolf up north. All right, Lauren, now you can talk about
No, she's, I think on here it just says she's a lot of things. And I added that second part. I just really dislike everything about her. She's an interesting character, so I don't really know how to describe her in like all of her different realms, but I guess like the parts that were most like infuriating to me is that like she basically befriended Glorian. No, Tunuva. Sorry, I'm thinking of the two that had like birth trauma stuff. So she befriended Tunuva and like fed into like Tunuva's trauma from like losing her son and like manipulated the shit out of her and like all of this stuff, like befriended her, was like empathizing with her, like made up this whole backstory, and then
it wasn't made up. No, it's true.
It's true, yeah.
So this is going to be spoilers for the Priory. So once again, if you have not read that book,
Tap that skip 30 seconds button on your phone.
Turn around, skip a bit. So Canthi is Kaliba in the Priory, and so we get her background in the fact that she is the OG Sabran's mom. Like, she birthed the OG Sabran, and the reason why they all look the same is because of Canthi.
Well, and then come to find out she's the one that basically kidnapped or abducted or whatever, stole, however you want to say, Wolf. And I can't pronounce the wolf's name, name. They said it multiple times, but yeah, she took the baby and basically left him in the woods, and then then she comes back later and freaking tries to steal the gem thing, the stone, and like she's just, I don't like her.
Yeah, the stone. See, I find her a super interesting character because I want to know more about her and what makes her tick. Because at the end of the day, she is a bad person. She does some stuff. Like, she comes into the Priory to steal the stone or gem or whatever you want to call it. I think they call it stone. Half the stone. And she actually ends up falling in love with Tunuva, though. And that last scene where Tunuva's like, well, you know, I hope you end up alone. And she's like, oh, sad face, because that's all she ever wants is someone to love and have someone love her back. And that's her Achilles heel. Like, ain't nobody gonna love her. Nobody's gonna love her. This happens to her in this book.
Don't
this
be a bitch
to her in the
then.
Priory that we find out. And it's just right. Yeah, it's maybe. Yeah, she's a lot of things. She's a lot of character because she lives immortal because of her. That was true. Her tree did give her immortality and all that jazz. So,
okay, I'm gonna combine the last two into one. So we got Sabran the Third as well as Bardholt, King Bardholt. Sabran the Third is the Queen of the Virtudom. Bardholt is her husband and the King of Hróth. When they get married, they merge two kingdoms together and make this massive kingdom. It's interesting because like they as a couple, you can tell that they clearly do love each other, but the nature of their life and their I mean, for lack of a better term, their jobs, their duty compels her to always be in the south and him to always be in the north. And Hróth. I don't know.
Hróth. It's just Hróth. Just Hróth. And she's in Inys.
And she's in Inys.
Inys. She's in Inys.
And so they're forced to be apart for most of their life, which is sad. But I thought they were really well written characters. And then you get the epic scene also where they're seemingly just traveling to a wedding and their entire fleet of boats.
Oh my god! Can we talk about that scene? Like,
by a dragon,
death,
or multiple dragons.
Death.
Yeah.
No, it was Firidel who made them into shish kebabs.
Well, it was Firidel as well as like an army of other wyrms too, right? It wasn't just him.
I'm not sure. I thought it was.
I think he had a crew to help burn the other ships. But so yeah, that is Sabran and Bardholt. And with that, we'll move on to our actual discussion questions for this book. The first one is: A Day of Fallen Night is a prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree. How did reading this book change your understanding or interpretation of the events and characters in the main novel?
So first off, both books are standalone novels, so you can read them in any order. But I think this reading one versus the other, and like I said, doesn't matter which order you read. They complement each other, and you get to learn more about the world. And I think it's definitely more enriching to do that. And I also thought it was really cool to see how the actions of the characters from this book affected what happened in the Priory. And also it was frustrating to see how the inactions of certain characters shaped the world of the Priory, because you do learn that certain characters find out that the whole virtudom and that religion is based on a complete lie. And it doesn't seem like anything gets done, because 500 years from now in the Priory book, they're still practicing that crap religion, if you ask me. So I think you definitely, if you read one, you have to read the other one. It's one of those things.
So I agree with most of what Barbara said. I think that as far as changing your understanding and interpretation, I mean, it's kind of like, so I love history, and I feel like in a lot of ways, this was reading A Day of Fallen Night was kind of like reading a history book about this world after reading The Priory, because, and I don't say that in the sense that it's a dry story, like reading a literal textbook. It's not at all. but you're learning the history of this world, and learning the history is important to understand the present, which was the Priory. And I think that in that way it was really interesting. And like Barbara said, it was frustrating to see, because the virtuedom is all based on a lie that the person who started this all begun many, many years ago. And it was interesting and frustrating to see how close they were to changing that. Like if Glorian and Wolf, I guess, hadn't realized that Lord Robart was a heathen, as they called him, which just meant that he didn't practice virtuedom. He practiced the old gods, or believed in the old gods. And there was this big plan in place for him and the person who Glorian was married were going to, in their minds, corrupt and change the perspective of the queen and get the society to leave virtuedom behind and go back to the old ways. And they were really close. It was like a Scooby-Doo moment. They would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those damn kids.
It's meddling kids.
Meddling kids. But yeah, so I mean, it's interesting in that sense as well. And obviously, I mean, one of the negatives to this is that you do, some of the stakes are a little lower, which I think Barbara mentioned in the non-spoiler part, because obviously you know that Fieradel is in Priory, so you know that he's not going to be defeated in any permanent way in this book. But yeah, so I mean, it takes some of the stakes out, but it is really interesting to learn the history of this very diverse, vast,
I always
vibrant
think it's neat to read a prequel,
that she created.
Because it sheds light on so many aspects of the future storylines that you get in the next book. I think, I feel like seeing the characters being essentially the ancestors of future characters and how that was kind of shaped was really cool, and definitely added a layer to the world building. I feel like Michael said it really well with like the whole, you're reading kind of a history book, but not a boring one, to really get a better understanding. I do think, though, if I was going to reread them, I would read this one first and then Priory. But that's just me.
The book features a richly imagined fantasy world. What aspects of the world building did you find most interesting or engaging? And how did the setting contribute to the overall story? So as you guys probably know at this point, I'm a sucker for a well-built world and world building in fantasy novels. And Samantha Shannon is one of the best at world building, in my opinion, because what she's created in both the Priory and then also in A Day of Fallen Night is a world that is not only vast and full of all of these crazy cultures and stories and everything that we see, but in some books, it feels like as you're going through the story, for metaphor's sake, the artist is painting as you go, and you're seeing the scene unfold as you go. Whereas Samantha Shannon, it feels like she's developed this entire world that feels lived in, like it feels real, like you're going through, like she's developed not just characters and what they're going to do, but she's developed cultures and she's developed religions inside that cultures, and then histories for those religions and cultures, and politics and different political systems for different areas of the world, and then different stories as to how they became in that political system and how they switched to that from something else. And it's insane. The world building in this book is insane. It's one of my favorite things about this book. And also there's a beautiful, beautiful map that she included as well in the book. And I'm also a sucker for maps because I love to be able to see where we're at in the world. And so I was constantly referencing that. And because I was reading this on my Kindle, I was going back and forth between reading it on the Kindle and looking at the map on my iPad, because the map is in full color if you have a device that will show that. And so I was switching back and forth to look at the map. But the world building is amazing. The world that she built is amazing.
Yeah, I really did love the world building in this book. It was very complex at times, which got confusing to me, but very well thought out and ultimately very impactful. I did enjoy that each region had their own political landscape and traditions. I enjoyed the depictions of the dragons and wyrms, however you say it. For me, setting is huge when it comes to this genre, especially because I'm not like a big fantasy person, and so like a well-built world, I guess, is really important for me to get into it, just because, I don't know, because it's not like my first choice in general. If I don't connect or find the world intriguing, then it's hard to get into a story for me, just in general. So this was great in the sense that I felt like the author did a great job of creating really several worlds within a larger scope. Like, not that there was literally like multiple worlds, but it seemed like because the regions were so different and they were so like unique in themselves, it was almost like Priory was one world and Inys was another, and like there was just like not different worlds, I guess, maybe different countries. Is that a better
I think that's a good example. She created effectively she created a planet that had all these different cultures and countries and societies and kingdoms and whatnot. So, yeah, I think that was a good example.
And I already like gave her a nod to characters, but I feel like second to characters, it being a character driven, it was definitely like setting driven as far as like just the complexity of the world itself. And I'm really sad now hearing that there was a freaking cool color map that I didn't get because I did the Audible version. So sad day for Lauren.
I didn't look at the map either, and now I'm gonna have to pull it up on Google. So yeah, the world building is exquisite. It's literally like a character all on its own, and I think when an author can make the whole world into what seems like a very alive character, I think they've done a hell of a job, and she clearly has on this one. Like Lauren said, it did get confusing at times, trying to keep up with all of the region's different customs. But I think that's what made it so good as well, is just because, like Michael said, like you have queendoms, you have kingdoms, you have empires and empresses, emperors. You have, I think at one point one was not a democracy, what is it?
It's a republic.
A republic, and they were like going on about how stupid that was, and it's just, you have all like this very rich environment that these characters are living in. And it really does feel kind of like our world, in the sense it's like, okay, you know, South America is very different from Asian cultures versus African cultures. And even within those different cultures, you have different cultures of, of Asians and South Americans and Latins and all this stuff. So it's just, that's kind of what she did here. Like every place had different customs and different religions. And I think that was my favorite aspect, was those customs and the religions, and just seeing how she built all that was just really interesting. And to see how that affected the character and character motivations. Like certain characters were deathly afraid of magic because, you know, in their side of the world, in their pocket of the world, you don't do, like, magic is for the, what do they call them? The non-believers, you know? And then, like, in another part of the world, like, dragons are their gods, you know? Shandon, unbelievers.
I was doing everything in me not to jump in and say that, but I was like, she moved on to a serious point. I can't jump in here and be like, Sean, the non-believers.
It's okay, I did it in my own head. But yeah, it's just just love it. She did a hell of a job. It was amazing, so...
All right, moving on from there. The novel raises questions about the nature of prophecy and destiny. How do the characters in the book grapple with these concepts? Do they believe in fate, or do they believe that they have agency in shaping their own futures?
I think many of the characters get stuck in the idea of prophecy or destiny. It's literally what some of the regions, religions, and customs are based around, like the whole idea that one must reproduce because it's their destiny, regardless of their life circumstance or preferences. So that was kind of what I took from that.
Yeah, you know, poor, like Lauren's mentioned multiple times, poor Glorian is definitely a victim of believing in destiny, so much so that that's her overall main struggle and arc throughout the book, is her dealing with that and just being seen as a vessel to further the Berethnet line so the Nameless One doesn't come out or whatever and ruin the world. So that's her destiny. Like, that is what she was put on this earth to do, and unfortunately all the women of the Berethnet line, that is what they're supposed to do, quote unquote, and what I'm saying supposed to do. Whereas I think Dumai believes that a little bit in the sense of the maybe a prophecy, in the sense that, you know, like there's these stones and then the comet's coming and then she has to help with the dragons. And then I think as far as breaking that thought, I think Wolf is the character that thinks that he can shape his own future, but it's his character arc and you see his thought process changing, because at first he's like, oh, he's the kid that everyone thinks is a weirdo because he, you know, is the child from the forest, and everyone thinks he's a heathen and he's magical and he's awful and all of these things that they don't believe in. Being comfortable with who he actually is once he learns who he is and all that things. And then you can see him be like, you know what? No, I'm taking my future into my own hands and I will, you know, dictate what I say about this. and breaking that whole thought process.
I don't have much more to add from what you two said. But yeah, I mean, I think that each character, every perspective character we had to wrestle with the idea of prophecy and destiny in their own way. And I think that it was handled really well. And it's like Barbara said and Lauren said with Glorian, obviously was struggling with that. And Dumais was struggling with that. And Wolf had his battles. And, the Tunuva and the Priory did too. I mean, there's an aspect of prophecy with how they believe that the Nameless One will return, and their whole existence is about training to be ready for that fight when it comes. So much so that they are only allowed to pledge loyalty to the mother and not have any outside relationships that are like committed relationships anyway. And so, every group and every person in every group in the book has some sort of prophecy or destiny that they're either leaning into or fighting against. And it was definitely interesting to see the dichotomy of those two things in the novel. The book also features multiple narrators, each with their own unique perspective and voice. How did the use of multiple narrators enhance or detract from your reading experience? Which characters did you find the most compelling and why?
So I've always loved books, multiple POVs, so that's never been an issue for me. I actually think it always makes the book richer since you get to see different aspects and different, point of views. And I didn't really have a problem with the point of view since their voices were so different. And I think if you can do that well, where you can distinguish between the characters' voices, then you've done your job here. Because sometimes people try POVs, and that's the time when I don't different POVs, and that's the time when I don't like it, when it's like character A sounds just like character B, and if you don't have like a distinguishing factor, you have no idea who the hell is talking. Like this one, it's very apparent whose scene we're reading the point of view of. The only thing that I found hard to keep track of, which I've already talked about, is just there's so many side characters and different side characters with different customs and different religions and all that stuff within each character's point of view. So sometimes they're referencing like character blah 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 and do my story. I'm like, okay, who's this bitch again? Like, why they're the empress of this other part of their little island of Seiki, and there's all this other stuff going on. So that part I felt a little, it was hard to wrap your head around trying to figure that part out. But overall, I actually really enjoyed all the point of view characters this time around. I never felt disappointed when I got to one particular characters though. But if I had to pick, I think my two favorites, honestly, I really liked all of them. I never found myself being like, I don't want to read these characters. I kind of did that in the Priory. Looking at you, Nicolace. Sorry. But I still think if I had to pick, my favorites were still Dumais and Tunuva's.
So like Barbara, I also like books, especially fantasy and science fiction books that have multiple POVs or multiple narrators, as long as it's done well. And in this one, it definitely is. I mean, the book is literally character driven. Each character is so unique that it's impossible to not be able to tell the difference, even when you're listening to the audiobook. But I also agree with Barbara in the sense that they're, in some ways, like it's a love-hate thing in a sense that I love how deep the world was and how much there was there, like little tiny details. But sometimes those little tiny details were hard to be like, hold on, who is she talking about? Where is this place? What's this building that she's named? What is this custom they're talking about? And I'd have to reference back. Not that that's a bad thing, just it made the hop between narrators sometimes a bit of a struggle. But yeah, like I said, generally that's what I prefer. There's obviously exceptions to that rule. Defending Jacob, looking at you. Some books are better when it's a single narrator, but this one is not. It was great in multiple POVs. As far as most compelling, I agree with Barbara. I think all of them were compelling. The only time I found myself in this book like being like, oh, another chapter from so-and-so was Dumais, but only at the beginning. Before she found out that she was an empress and all of that storyline started, I thought her chapters were kind of boring. But otherwise, I really enjoyed each of them. As far as the most compelling, if I had to pick one or two, since Barbara picked two, it would probably be Tunuva and Glorian. No, Tunuva and Wolf, I think, actually.
I felt like it enhanced the reading experience because I always enjoy getting more than just one perspective. I guess I shouldn't say always. Like you guys mentioned, like it's some books like are just trying too hard to do the POV type thing and it doesn't work out for them. But typically I like to get more than just one character perspective. It detracted for me just because on the audiobook, which is my own fault for doing audiobook, I guess, it was definitely hard to keep track of, especially early on. Like I would say for like the first third of the book, really. Just, it was due to the audiobook instead of the physical copy. I honestly think that if I was reading it, it would have been easier to keep track of everything. I liked Tunuva best, probably, because I felt like she was just a badass throughout. But then, actually, I don't know if I liked her best. I really liked Glorian. I really liked Dumai. I just
want to point out every single one of us had an internal argument when answering that part of the question about
I
who to
liked
pick.
all of them for different reasons. Yeah, because Tunuva, like everything she went through, the way she persevered, like the way she loved and took care of like the people around her, I just really enjoyed her. But also like Glorian, I had so much sympathy and empathy for her, what she overcame, and then Dumai, she got to ride dragons. She's just a badass, so it was just really hard to choose. But
I could literally do a TED Talk about all the characters and why I love them so much. Like, that's welcome to my TED Talk.
Barbara will be putting out her own bonus episode that's just her talking about each of the characters. The episode will be 4 hours in length, so buckle in. Anyway, moving on from there, the novel explores themes of duty, sacrifice, and legacy. Which characters were the most affected by these themes, and how did they respond to the challenges that they faced? I think each character throughout the book had their own duty or sacrifice or legacy they were trying to uphold, whether it was Glorian and the fact that her duty was that she had to give birth to a daughter, and for her that was a sacrifice because she had no interest in having a kid or doing any of those things. She wanted to just live her life and not be chained to this it's not culture, this custom. That's what I'm trying to think of. So that was Glorian. Dumai got her life completely thrown for a loop when she initially thought she was doing her duty, living up in the mountains and doing what she needed to do for this remote religious society. Then all of a sudden, nope, she's going to be empress. She's daughter of the current emperor, and that's her duty now. And so she has to sacrifice her old way of life. She has to sacrifice a lot of her privacy and the things that she chooses to enjoy, because all of a sudden she's thrust into this situation where she is all eyes on her, and more than just because they're curious. A lot of them are trying to dethrone her or delegitimize her claim to the throne. And so that again plays into all three, both duty, sacrifice, and legacy. Wolf, same thing. He feels a duty to King Bardholt and to Glorian as his friend. As well as to his group of soldiers that he goes with. He feels a duty to them, and he would willingly sacrifice his life for them. Almost does multiple times throughout the book.
Wolf
and
goes through
legacy,
some shit.
He does go through some shit. Legacy, again, is part of his story because he thinks that he doesn't know what his legacy is. He doesn't know where he comes from. And then he learns about that and realizes that he has a legacy outside of the virtuedom with the Priory. And let's see, who else? Tunuva, last person I didn't talk about. Tunuva, all three things as well. She has a duty to the mother. She has a duty to protect the realm from the Nameless One. She literally is unfortunately sacrificed her child as part of this because of that happened as part of her life and her customs and the way she was living. She also has to sacrifice the other things that you kind of get an idea that maybe she would like a normal relationship with Esbar, where they weren't confined to the rules of the Priory. When you got some internal monologue from her, you kind of got these inklings of like when she was in other cities, like, oh, it'd be like the thought of just moving to a city and living there with Esbar and not dealing with all this duty and things they have to do. And then the legacy of the Priory, they're protecting that as well from the world and Conthi and everything. All four characters were affected by these themes. I think that you can't pick one character and say they were most affected. And I think I just went over how they all faced the challenges, at least from my perspective. So
yeah, I just said all of them were affected, essentially. Glorian literally was made to feel like a human incubator because it was her duty to have an heir, regardless of her preferences, like we'd talked about before, which is just crazy. And then I feel like sacrifice was Dumai for sure. And I put that she maybe paid the ultimate sacrifice for her people, but she actually did survive. Yeah, I mean, those were the two that I kind of down. I didn't pick anybody for legacy, apparently. Probably Wolf for legacy, maybe?
I honestly don't have much to say. Like, Michael did a very good job of analyzing this, made really good points. Like, all four point of view characters faced all of these things at one point in time during all 880 pages of the book. So, they all at one time was duty, sacrifice, legacy, and all that. And I think that's what makes them well-written characters, because at one point they were all struggling with these things and what that meant to them and these notions. And how they felt about it. So good job, Michael. I've got nothing left to say for that.
Well, that works out because I think Lauren and I both defer to you on the next question. So the next question is, the novel provides insight into the world of the Priory, including its history and traditions. What new information did you learn about the Priory and its role in the world? How did this information enhance your understanding of the Priory of the Orange Tree or the world building in general?
So I was happy to get more information on the Priory since I was really wanting that from the original book. Like, we get hints of it, but not really. And I think I like that we got more in-depth information on the inner workings of the Priory. Like, they're essentially these hidden warriors that are training for when the Nameless One comes. And even though it's been like 500 years at this point of this novel, that's their primary focus, and they're keeping it hidden because they don't want outside people to find out, because then they're afraid of what would happen because people would want to steal the magic from their tree. So it also helped me to understand like why they did certain things and how their magic worked as well, because like I said in the original book, The Priory of the Orange Tree, like you get this idea that she eats the orange from the tree and she gets this magic, the Sidon as they call it. She can do, fire essentially, and use that. And then you don't really get too much of it. But in this one, it's like this freaking plethora of information. And you see how their world, essentially, why they do the things that they do and how that actually affected stuff in the Priory of the Orange Tree. So I just really loved that we got to see more of it here, because I was so interested in that aspect of the original novel, and I felt like that part was kind of lacking in the original one. This one was just, she fed me the information I wanted, and I felt satiated just like Lauren said.
Sated is correct. Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add on this one. I'll just say that I agree with Barbara that the Priory, you definitely got to the end of Priory of the Orange Tree and ironically felt wanting because you wanted more information about the background of the Priory. And this book gives you a very rich history. And beyond that, I don't have anything to add. I think that
it's funny that it's called the Priory of the Orange Tree, but you don't get too much about the Priory of the Orange Tree. This one, you get more about the Priory of the Orange Tree. So I was like, what?
Kind of funny.
She realized that people complained about not getting enough Priory on the first one.
I think she listened to the readers and the aspects of what us readers complained about, because everything that I had an issue with from the Priory of the Orange Tree, she like fixed and like hit it out of the park with this one, I think.
Yeah, I literally wrote for this one that you should go first because I would echo everything that you already kind of said. I felt like it was really helpful to get background info on the tree and the magic and the society around the Priory, and just was definitely useful for the world building to like, I think that's really why I would read this one first, like why I would choose the order. Like, I think that it would give me more of an appreciation reading Priory than the first time I read it. So I may go back and reread that.
That's fun. Michael and I were just talking about that. I'm like, I like, this makes me want to reread the Priory, and maybe I will understand it a little bit more. And
anyway, moving on from there are many different romances in the novel. Which was your favorite to read and why?
Chose Dumai and Nikea. I loved them so much. And then I cried when Dumai died, maybe, and left her alone. And then she was like calling for her and watching the sea for the dragon to show back up. And it was so sad. I liked their relationship a lot. There was lots of different relationships in the book that I liked, but that one was my favorite. I felt like they were the most like I felt like Tunuva's relationship was probably the most like steady, right? And but then I got really mad at Esbar during it. So I do my and Nikea for the forever.
So I know we're talking about romance and in that aspect of relationships, but I just want to also hark on the fact that the platonic relationships that she's written for this is also very well written. You have, all of the Priories and the sisters and how the love for each other, and you see that in the mother-daughter relationship with Tunuva and Siyu and all that stuff, and her and Wolf. You see Wolf and his love for all of his friends and his little band of group of people, and with Glorian, the things that he does for Glorian, and same with Glorian, and then her, her sisters, I don't know, what do you call them, her like bedchambers people, I don't know, whatever they're called, that help her out, and their love for each other, and then Dumai and her mom, and Dumai and Knif. I don't know, but they're
I think the audiobook said Canifa.
Canifa. Okay, oh wow, that's definitely not how I pronounce it in my head.
Was it Canifa, Lauren, or Conifa?
It was Canifa, yeah. Right? That's why
Canifa,
when Barbara was saying that, I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, sorry, Canifa, like he fell in love with Dumai, but he was okay with just being her friend because she didn't feel any romantic feelings for him, but they were like the best of friends. And when he died, I swear to God, I was just like, oh God, my heart. Anyways, I just wanted to preface that because I just love how she wrote that, because she does a very good job not only with romantic relationships, but just platonic as well. As far as the romance in this book, I freaking hearted all the romances in this book. Tunuva and Esbar's established love story. Sometimes I'm not a huge fan of established love stories because you don't see like the build up, but their relationship really goes through something. So that was really beautiful to see. But overall, my favorite was Dumai and Nikia. I'm a sucker for slow. Give me the slow burns. And enemies to lovers trope. Love that. I love their chemistry, their back and forth, and their teasing, and their flirting. And I can go on and on about them. I absolutely loved the build up for their relationship. I just thought it was just so very well done, and I loved them so much, and it broke my heart. And then it was fine afterwards, but.
So just to talk about a different relationship, since we guys both talked about Dumai and Nikia, their relationship was amazing. I enjoyed the romance as well. But I also enjoyed the romance that you get at the very, very end of the book for a little tiny bit, which was Wolf and Thrit, the unexpected relationship, at least for me. So I thought that was really neat at the end when there was like that really emotional moment where like Thrit is going off and like he's like, if I never get a chance to do this again, I'm just going to do it, damn it. And he kissed him. And then, at the end, they did get their happily ever after, where they decided they're going to go travel the world after things settled down. So I like to see that at the end for Wolf. Let's see. Next up is the book explores themes of faith, religion, and spirituality. How do these themes intersect with the magical elements of the story? What do you think the book suggests about the relationship between faith and magic? So yeah, I mean, faith, religion, and spirituality are huge parts of this book. And it's interesting because I think that they don't just intersect with the magical elements, like in the sense of the Priory, their faith and their religion and their spirituality are the magic. Like they're so interconnected that they're not just intersecting, but their religion is effectively part of the magic, or the magic rather is part of their religion. So for them, the relationship between faith and magic is incredibly intertwined because the Sidon and all of the power that they have, they believe is directly given to them by the mother so that they can protect the realm from the Nameless One when he returns. And so it's very, very intertwined. The other characters and the other cultures, though, I guess Glorian and Wolf's culture, there really isn't magic anymore. There's lots of faith, lots of religion, lots of, not really spirituality, lots of faith and religion. I would say the Virtuedom, if you're going to just compare it to a religion in real life, is probably most comparable to institutionally to something like the Catholic Church. Now, knowing that comparison, you can kind of put together the way that their faith and things are set up. And then Dumai obviously is closer to the Priory in the sense that they do still have magic in Seiki, and they believe their gods are the dragons that come out of the ocean and have been living asleep for all this time. And so I think you could argue that at some point in Seikanese history that magic and their faith and religion were as intertwined as it is at the Priory, but in the time of this book and in the time, well, less so in the Priory of the Orange Tree, but in this book, magic has been gone from their society for a long time. And it's just now starting to come back as Dumai awakens the dragons or the gods again. I guess a brief description of how the faith and religion intersects with magic in this story.
I would echo that as far as just the fact that, I don't know, faith and magic kind of regionally in this world are kind of different as far as like the dragon gods being, I'm really bad at keeping track of like which region worshipped which thing, but like one of the people did like the dragons were their god, and then the Priory like they kind of worshipped, for lack of a better term, the mother. And there's just like a lot of religious aspects, but I felt like all of it was kind of intertwined with magical or mythical, I guess, more so than magical, maybe, aspects or elements. But I did feel like the author did a good job of weaving in like politics and like kind of current, like, I don't know, not current, like obviously we're not flying dragons and shit around.
I would love that.
That would be awesome. But like religious undertones, I guess, of actual religions that we deal with in our world, using those as maybe inspiration for some of it.
Yeah, I really found this part super interesting since it covers all aspects of faith, like the religious and spirituality aspects and parts of it. The sisters, I think, of the Priory are a good example of spirituality. Like, they honor the mother and the tree, but it's not a set religion, and they don't fear the magic, obviously, because they use it. Demai, and I think to a degree, the people of Seiki is a good example of just faith. Like, they believe in the gods, aka the dragons, and they honor them in that way. They don't have like a set, very strict religion. Whereas Glorian and the Virtudom is religion at its finest. Like, literally, Glorian's mom, Sabran, makes her future husband, convert to their religion, the Virtudom, before she marries him. And I think theirs is a very stereotypical religious views, very stereotypical views. And I think the book did a good job of showing it all and how it affects people and the way they view others in the world. And she did a good job with that. Just different aspects of it all, the goods and the bads of all of it.
Moving on from there, the novel features multiple complex female characters, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Which of these characters did you find the most interesting or relatable, and why? How did their struggles and triumphs shape the overall story?
So I'm going to really go into this. So I'm sorry, but here we go. So I'm going to keep harping about this. Like, this book does such a good job of showing different aspects of what it means to have complex female characters. Like, they are strong, but in different ways. Once again, I don't see a sword, like, I don't need a sword wielding female character to think that she's a strong female character. Like, they need to have strengths and flaws and character arcs. And they need to be allowed to be vulnerable and show their feelings. Like, they can't just be like, pick me girls, I hate those too. And honestly, I love them all for it. Like, I loved that Tunuva. I loved Tunuva because she was literally a badass warrior character. The strongest fighter in the book, mind you. But she was also soft as well. Like, she cared for others and she led with her heart. She loved so fiercely. It was beautiful to read. Whereas in Demai, I feel like was like the complete opposite. Like, she was not a warrior. She doesn't know how to fight. Yet she's such a strong person her own way. Like, she's quick-witted. She fiercely fights for the truth and for all of her people. To some say even her own detriment at times. She rises above the River Lords' taunts and schemes. Whereas Glorian, like I said earlier, I think she's again different than either of them. Like, she's a good balance between those two. She knows how to literally protect herself and is sharp-witted and knows, the queen aspect of running a queendom and putting her needs and stuff above herself for her people. She fights against her duties internally and struggles with having to put the queendom, like I said, above herself, but she rose to the occasion. Seeing her struggle with just being a pawn and just another quote-unquote womb was really gut-wrenching, and I think Samantha did a very good job with that. The side characters were all just as beautifully flawed and complex as well. We have Esbar with how she dealt with Siyu and then Tunuva, but then realizing that she was wrong and actually apologizing and growing for it. And that's why I liked Esbar. Like, yeah, she was rude at times with Tunuva and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, she realized that she was wrong and she apologized. Like, that's how a relationship works. They weren't both stomping their feet. And it wasn't just Tunuva saying I'm sorry. Like, Esbar was like, I'm sorry, I was in the wrong. As well as Nakia, she's another great example. She was a pawn in her father's game, literally. And she grows into her own and uses everything that he taught her to rebel against him in such a beautiful way. And then you got poor, beautiful, flawed Canthe, just I love getting to know even more about her. And I feel like we've only just skimmed the surface of what makes Canthe/Cleva tick. And I want to know more of her story.
I have nothing to add to that. I was reading Barbara's thing earlier today, her response to this, and I was like, I cannot say any of this better than you already did, Barbara. So my hat's off to you, and I will pass the baton to Lauren.
I would agree, except we were supposed to say which one we found the most interesting and relatable. So
all of them.
All of them. I felt like, I really don't know that I could pick one If I had to pick one, it would probably be Tunuva, but I feel like all of it. Full stop, mic drop.
Yes, that's why it's hard to pick a relatable one because they can all be relatable. They all have different aspects that I relate to, like really.
Except for Canty.
What are you talking about? Barbara's just like Candy.
I just want to steal all the little orbs of the world, and everyone's lovers.
And the babies.
And babies. I just want it all.
All right, so let's talk about the ending. What did you think of the ending? And was there anything you wished that there was more of? I thought it was a really good ending. I thought it led up to an epic finale. I remember I was reading it as I was getting to the end, texting Barbara, like, how dare you? Like, all these people are getting killed. And I was upset, just like you was talking about earlier, like when Demai and her dragon fell out of the sky and I thought she was dead. And I thought she was dead, to be honest, until Lauren told us earlier tonight that she wasn't. I really liked the ending. I thought she did a really good job wrapping things up. The ending was one of the things that I know that I complained about in Priory of the Orange Tree because I did not like how that ended. I felt like there was more story to tell and she just cut it off. Whereas this one felt like it had a really nice closure with still the open door to tell some more story if she chooses to. As far as if I wish that there was anything more, it would have been, I mean, you heard me earlier talk about Wolf and Thrit's relationship. It would have been cool to see more of their relationship and some of those happy times at the end for Wolf. But to be honest, like the things that I would add are all things that are just wants. They're not things that I feel like I needed to add to the story to get the closure for the end. I think she did a great job.
I agree. I felt like the ending, while very heart-wrenching, was well done. I did not like when Fertia fell from the sky. I got a little mad at Barbara.
That was an epic day in our group chat as Lauren was giving us the play-by-play of her emotions while she got to the end of the book.
Yes, well, they have both finished before I did, so I felt like I needed to share my experience play-by-play. But yeah, Barbara, because you're the one that picked to read this one, and I was then attached to all these characters and then thinking that everybody was going to die. But yeah, I thought that the ending was really good. I think that it left just enough still open-ended if she does want to include some of these storylines in like a future book. I know that in the same interview where she confirmed that Glorian didn't die, Demai didn't die. She also said that she does plan to write more books, but not necessarily like sequels, more standalones. So maybe we'll get some more like just continuation of characters. Who knows? But there wasn't really anything that I wished there was more of. Maybe some more karma for Canty, but but otherwise, I think.
Lori wants to see her be unloved for another 500 years.
Oh,
Lauren wants Canty the memoir.
Right? No, why can't we shish kebab her? Like talked about shish kebabbing people.
I mean, she got crushed by the lid of a concrete coffin like that.
And then she got crushed emotionally by Tunuva because she said, "Screw you, I don't love you. You're going to die alone."
Why would
you can't die, so you won't be alone.
Immortal or not, that definitely hurt.
Right.
Why would she love someone? Why would Tunuva love her after the manipulative shit she pulled? No, I thought the ending was well done.
Okay, so what can I say about the ending? It broke me and it made me whole again. That's what I can say. Tunuva and her interactions with Canty and then Esbar were done so well. Like Wolf and his scenes with his daughter, Sabran the 7th, and then still looking out after Glorian, and then finally being at peace with who he is and allowing himself to be loved by Thrit. I do selfishly wish that we could see him going back home to be with Tunuva, though. I think that would have been nice to see, and see if maybe they allowed Thrit to be a part of the Priory. And then Glorian, her still struggling with being a mom and not wanting to put the burden of being a Berethnet on her own daughter, and then struggling with postpartum depression, essentially what she had. I think that scene was done really, really well, and I would have loved to have seen how CU and Glorian could have like helped each other, because I feel like they were struggling with the same stuff as far as like CU being away from her child and then Glorian dealing with having or being a new mom. Obviously, and then my love of Demai. I was so worried that she was going to sacrifice herself, and she did. And I was so heartbroken for Nakia and seeing her struggle with it, but then still honoring Demai's wishes. And I wrote this before it was confirmed, but I said I didn't care what anyone else believes in my headcanon. I think the new maiden officiant is Demai. And then she came back from the dead. And my cold heart soared with happiness when I read that. And it was, Lauren just told us that was confirmed that she is alive. And I'm even more happy. Happier, even more happy. I'm happier. Just left them. So yay for
Both
them.
technically, grammatically correct.
Oh, okay. Well, it didn't sound right coming out of my mouth. But
One final question. Like we've been talking about, Samantha Shannon has confirmed she's writing another book in this series. What stories would you like to see told in this book?
So I would like more expansion. I mean, obviously, like I said, I need some karma for Canthi. She'll, we'll maybe hear about some other demise she meets later on. That'll be fine. But I know she's writing another book, but are we gonna get more Dumai and Nakia?
We need to. I would be happy with an 800-page book of just them.
we need more of that. I would really like to see Glorian come into her own and maybe some kind of arc there happening. Otherwise, I don't know. Just I'm down to read something else that she writes as long as it's in this world.
Yeah. I would love to see more of the Canthi Kaliba's story, her origin story. I feel like would be really amazing to see. I just feel like she's such an interesting character. Why is she evil? Why did she decide this?
That's true.
What does she do? That's what I want to know. What does she do that is so terrible that she needs to steal all these little stones and make right in the world? What the hell does this bitch do? Does she bring up the Nameless One, so now she has to help? But we know that can't be it because she joins him in the Priory. Well, spoilers for the Priory, I don't know.
I bet she pops back up in the next novel with a different name.
Right, it'll be someone else. I know. Anyway, so I think that would be really cool to see. I would also like to see the period of the Nameless One and Cleoland, that whole story. I think would be really interesting to see, their OG Nameless One and actually see him, wreak havoc, since we technically haven't seen him do that. I feel like Samantha hinted on another evil that comes in between this book and then the Priory during Glorian's epilogue. Her grandmother on her dad's side mentioned and I'm going to completely butcher this, the Vilda Vintra, which was a time when the spirits would break free of the ice and kill the world. What the hell? I would love to, hear more about that. I feel like that's super foreboding and super interested if that happens. And I don't know if that would be maybe before the Priory or after the Priory, or, if that happens, or maybe this was before both books. I don't know. But I would just be happy with more in this world and more characters. And if there's more, Demai and Nakia, I'm going to be happy, very happy.
So I want one of two stories. I either want an origin story that I think would be the two things that Barbara mentioned. I think if you get an origin story for Canthi, you'd also get the origin story for Cleoland, because their stories are intertwined. And they clearly, they obviously know one another. And it would be really interesting to see what happened and how they broke the world. And because in that scene in the tomb, Canthi clearly implies that Cleoland had a hand in what happened as well. And so it would be, that's what I really want. That's my number one choice, is an origin story, and learning in that origin story about the other two trees that we don't know about. The hawthorn tree and the orange tree are the only ones we know about that are active or were active. There's two other trees, though, that Canthi mentions, and I want to learn about them too. So that's one. Or I want a direct sequel to this book where we get to see Dumai in her new role, and her and Nakia, and we also get to see, like Lauren mentioned, Glorian step into her own, and we get to see what happens with Wolf, and we get to see what happens with the Priory and Tunuva. So those are the two choices in my mind. I either want to go further back, or I want to be a direct sequel to this one. But that's it. We made it to the end. Let's talk about our individual scores for this book. Barbara, what did you give it?
So I give this one a 9. I think everything that I did not like about the Priory, everything that I complained about with the Priory, she took that in stride and made it a bit better and just blew it out of the park. Like she definitely delivered in this one. I absolutely loved all the characters and the things that she fixed that I had. All the dragons. There were so many dragons and loved it. So 9 for me.
Same. I also gave it a 9. It sounds like Luna gave it a 9 too, our husky that's been featured on this whole episode. But yeah, I gave it a 9 as well. It's definitely my favorite book that we've read for this season.
I also gave it a 9, and my 9, it comes as a highly weighted 9 because I don't really rate things very high, as you guys know.
I was gonna say, this is your first 9. This is literally your first 9 in our whole series of.
I thought there was one other 9.
Oh, did you?
No. 8.75 is the best score you've given a book.
There we go.
This is the highest rated book you've ever given, and it's a fantasy novel. Le gasp.
I feel like, though, part of my rating and why I chose to rate it this way was because it's a fantasy novel and because it was a super long book too. So like it had everything working against it in my mind. And the fact that I still enjoyed it as much as I did made it like, normally if this would have been like an 8-hour listen and this genre and I still enjoyed it about the same, I think I probably would have given it like a 7.5 or an 8. But since it already had like all of this stacked against it for me, and the fact that I still enjoyed it and the characters were so good and like it was so well written, I felt like I needed to give it a higher score because
plus dragons.
Plus dragons.
Right. That's a whole point in itself.
That's true. Yeah.
we did. This is a random time to point this out, but we did get a recommendation exclusively because Barbara has been talking about how much she likes dragons. Someone submitted a recommendation of a book with dragons for Barbara.
I will be the judge of that book.
Anyway, our group score for this one, like I said earlier, was a 9 out of 10. Pretty easy average when we all give it the same score. Make sure you're following Badass Literature for free in your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating and leave us a review if they allow you to. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. Our username on both places is @BadassLitPod on Instagram and Facebook.
Do you have feedback about today's episode? ? You can contact us by writing to badassliteraturesociety@gmail.com. You can also send us a DM or leave a comment on Instagram or Facebook.
And as always, thank you so much for listening. We will see you next month. I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara the Dragon Rider.
I'm Lauren. Bye.
Bye.